feeling ill might be scared about a fire in the general store, and the Egyptian version of the show frequently stresses the need for girls to get an education. So they're teaching them young.
Well, this is the one that's caught everyone's attention at the moment. It's about to be introduced in South Africa. The special episode with a Muppet that has HIV. Can you imagine them doing the alphabets? A, B, C, D, HIV? No, we shouldn't
Very
go
clever.
there. Anyway, we're going to hear about that a little later on. But first of all, we're going to do...
Sesame Street in South Africa is about to introduce a new character which is HIV positive.
So, is it the right move? Well, joining us now in the studio is Scott Berry from the group People Living with AIDS, while the Family Association's Bill Muhlenberg is in Melbourne. Good morning, gentlemen, to both of you. Thanks for joining us on Sunrise.
Good morning, thank you.
Scott, I want to start with you. What's your reaction to this move?
I think that this is a really wonderful move for South Africa in particular. What we know about South Africa in relation to the HIV epidemic is that 1 in 9 people are living with HIV, and what that means is that almost every family in South Africa is affected by HIV or AIDS. And for children in particular in South Africa, I think this is significant because they are going to be dealing with relatives who are living with HIV and maybe dying of AIDS. And I think that Sesame Street has a very long history of helping children deal with very complex and difficult issues in ways which they can understand, and that gives them the skill and the experience, if you like, to be able to cope with some of those things.
Bill, producers of the show are saying it's a non-threatening way to communicate what is a controversial message and start a dialogue. Do you agree?
Well, bear in mind that the average age of a Sesame Street watcher is 2 to 4 years of age. And we believe that just as a 2-year-old doesn't need to be exposed to the wars of the world, the drug problem, cancer, so it doesn't need, children don't need this kind of access at such an early age. They're simply not ready for it. They're not prepared for it. And really, we're taking away our children's innocence. We're taking away what it means to be a kid at this very early age.
But Bill, don't you think that the same argument would have been put maybe 20 or 30 years ago about the fact that Sesame Street was introducing children who came from African-American backgrounds, who were Chinese, who spoke different languages, who believed in different religions, had different spiritual beliefs, and that exactly the same arguments that this might be inappropriate or introducing political or far too complex issues for children would be too difficult or too much for them. And in fact, that Sesame Street have dealt with this issue incredibly well.
Well, again, the issue is how much is a 2 or a 3-year-old able to grasp, and what exactly, I wonder, will Sesame Street be doing with this HIV character? How much detail will they be telling the kids on air about how HIV/AIDS is contracted, how the disease is passed around? It seems to me it's something way beyond a 2 or 3-year-old, and it's not something that we as adults should be putting our problems onto very young, innocent children.
Bill, I can answer that for you. They're saying that the character, they won't explain how the character got it. The character is an orphan and just has HIV, so they want families to bring up this discussion. You talk about ages here and saying that 2 is too young. When is a good time to start introducing these sort of topics to kids?
Oh, certainly not at 2 or 3, perhaps at best high school, or perhaps a bit earlier, but certainly a 4-year-old has no conception of these kind of issues, really doesn't need to be pushed into it prematurely. And I guess some people are wondering, given that, say, cancer, heart attack, stroke are also big killers around the world, why don't we have characters like this on Sesame Street? Why are we kind of selectively picking what may seem to be kind of a politically correct disease?
Scott, I mean, is that a point? I mean, and Bill says there we haven't seen those other diseases covered. Should we start with something like AIDS?
Look, I'm really not quite sure whether that's an issue or not, or how to answer that particular question. I think the issue in terms of the South African context is that I imagine that children as young as 2 or 3 are dealing with the fact that there are people in their families living with HIV, maybe dying of AIDS, and one might argue it's not appropriate for them to be seeing that, but the reality is that they actually live in our world, and this is happening in their world, and I suspect that this is a very good way of helping them understand what might be for them quite a complex issue.
Do you think there's an argument to not introduce that character here in Australia? Because the AIDS problem isn't as big, and as Bill suggests, is heart disease more of an issue. Lung cancer, disability, disabled Muppets. so to speak?
I can only answer that question by saying that I expect that the mums with HIV that I know here, the dads with HIV, the kids with HIV would argue that introducing this character and seeing this character in Australia will really help them live in their neighbourhoods, will really help them live in their communities, live in their schools, and maybe be able to eventually feel no fear about talking about their mum being positive or them being positive themselves if they're children.
Gentlemen, unfortunately we're out of time. Fascinating discussion. Thanks for both of you for joining us today.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Well, coming up on